makes, I'm indeed very grateful. Escalating rate of unemployment in the country. Concerned that a large number of various levels of graduates that our high institutions are turning out yearly but cannot be absorbed by the labor market is a time bomb that is waiting to explode. Noting that a report published by the National Bureau of Statistics in 2019 stated that Nigeria's unemployment rate stood at 23.1% of the workforce in the third quarter of 2019. Further note that a statement created to Senator Chris Ngige, Minister of Labour and Productivity, and published in Premium Times of 9th November 2019, declared that Nigeria's unemployment rate will hit 33.5% by 2020. Worried that any nation with such number of unemployed but employable youths are only sitting on a keg of gunpowder. Perturbed that the most pressing demand on the hands of all of us legislators and public officers is the rising number of CV and application for employment from our various constituents. Convinced that a situation where every school graduate has to queue up for a job only in government offices is an indication of the breakdown of private sector, which is the major driver of world economies. Worried that these energies and potential talents that are lying idle and wasting away are usually misdirected towards many unprofitable and harmful ventures and lifestyles. Further worried that the most active percentage of the nation's population are forcefully caged from participating in the economic development of their fatherland and contributing towards the gross domestic product by unemployment. Aware that high level of crime in any society are most related to high rate of unemployment. Further aware that unemployment is one of the major causes of the upsurge in rural-urban migration, which put pressure on facilities at urban centers. Noting that unemployment...
Acting Chief Whip.
We know that unemployment is one of the major reasons why insurgency, kidnapping, armed robbery, cyber crimes, and other vices are in increase. We recall that various intervention programs by successive governments targeted at reducing youth unemployment and eradicating its co-travel and poverty have not yielded the desired results. The Senate is hereby called upon to resolve as follows. 1. To urge the federal, state, and local governments to declare emergency on the provision of employment to the youth of Nigeria. Secondly, to urge the federal government, through the Minister of National Planning, to put up a mechanism and program that will provide employment for our teeming unemployed graduates in all tiers of government. Thirdly, we urge the federal, state, and local government to revitalize existing industries, build new ones, and provide a conducive and enabling environment for the private sector to build more industries. And lastly, we urge the federal government to initiate a sustainable unemployment fund for the payment of living stipends to unemployed Nigerians until such persons secure any kind of employment. As so moved.
I stand to support and contribute to this very important issue. Unemployment, Mr. President, is a serious national problem. It's a problem that affects every one of us here, directly or indirectly. There is no doubt that all of us sitting here, we have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of graduates roaming the streets, and when we go home, we see pressure from them. So I think this is an issue that demands that all of us take very seriously by providing solutions as to how to reduce unemployment in our country. I was just discussing with my colleague here that one of the major achievements of our government, I'm talking about the federal government, was the effort of President Muhammadu Buhari in making sure that the iron and steel complex is back into business. Iron and steel complex alone is capable of employing over 25,000 people. But today, I doubt if they have up to 500 people working at iron and steel complex at Jakarta. It was abandoned by previous administration. And I think in discussing unemployment, we must take into consideration effort that is being made by some state governments on one hand and the federal government. The Iron and Steel Complex, when it was initiated, was supposed to have about 40,000 workers. Some few months ago, I was in Iron and Steel Complex at Jakarta. And I want to urge my colleagues here, if any of you have the time to visit Iron and Steel Complex, you pity the country called Nigeria. Therefore, Mr. President, there's no enough time that is allocated that we can say it's just been enough to discuss unemployment. And when you talk about unemployment, I think it goes beyond the federal government. State governments must be encouraged to look at what they can do by setting up small-scale industries. One of the strengths and power of China today was the number of small-scale enterprises that are available. Yesterday, Mr. President, I was in my house and more than 4 different banks came to me and they were telling me to fill forms and take money just because I'm back to the Senate. These are people I spoke to some months back to appeal to them to give me facility to run my business. They were not forthcoming. In essence, Mr. President, banks in Nigeria, they contributed in no small measure to the problem of unemployment in Nigeria. They refused to give facilities to small-scale industries. Of course, when they see you as a politician, Nigerian banks are easily available to you, asking to siphon public funds and give to them. But you tell them to give you money to run business. Nigerian banks will not give it to you. The graduates are roaming the street. Some of them have ideas as to how to be self-employed. But the facilities are not just there for them. There are quite a number of young enterprising Nigerians today looking at how to raise funds to run business. Even to go into agriculture, Nigerian banks are not ready to give them facility. So I think the problem is a complex problem. And we must not just look at the state and federal government alone. Let us look at the banking sector. What is happening to Nigerian banks? Nigerian banks will not give you facility. Now, if you're asking people to be self-employed, to be employed, how do they get facility to run their business? Nigerian banks have serious conditions. They will give you conditions that you cannot meet. And when they even offer you the facility, they'll be asking for 30%, 40% interest. So I think in addressing unemployment, we must not just talk about or encouraging state government and federal government to provide funding. We must look at source of facility. Funding is important. And I think it is not out of place if we look at the possibility of coming out with a blueprint, the kind of conditions that should be in place to encourage young graduates so that they can be on their own. Unemployment, Mr. President, is the problem of Nigeria.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. I rise, Mr. President, to lend my voice to this very important subject and to thank the distinguished Excellency Ekweremadu for again raising the issue of unemployment that has become a very serious matter in this country. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the situation of unemployment and the plight particularly of most of our youths in this country is what I now describe as the trauma, has brought upon them the trauma of despondency, helplessness, and hopelessness. Many of these our youths are well-read, have been through tertiary institutions, have multiple certificates, and have been in the labor market, some for upward of a decade, and still counting. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I am rising this morning to say that the government of Nigeria should declare a state of emergency on the unemployment situation in this country so that all hands will be on deck and deliberate steps must be taken to ensure that we rescue the generations of Nigerian youths that are in this state of the trauma of despondency and helplessness. And that will require that sectors like the agri sector, which has a lot of potential to generate a lot of employment opportunities, should be a situation that will attract attention at the policy level and as a deliberate policy of government. Equally important is the need to ensure that the private sector has an enabling environment to generate employment opportunities for our youth. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I again reiterate that the nation must declare a state of emergency on the unemployment situation in the country so that we can tackle this situation once and for all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank
you. Ekiti South. Mr. President, let me commend the mover of the motion and add my voice to the issue of unemployment in Nigeria. Mr. President, unemployment is a behemoth. We're just praying that it will swallow all of us up. And the reasons are very simple. They are not far-fetched. Nigeria has moved away from agriculture. Nobody wants to go back to the farm. Even those who are on the farms are just nominal farmers. They don't pay attention. They get people to do it for them. Mr. President, that is not even sufficient. Our youths have refused to imbibe vocational studies. They believe erroneously that being in that sector is like being out of education. Nobody wants to do handwork any longer. Everybody wants to read and wear the suits and the tie. In fact, the worst hit are the women. Most of them cannot get jobs. Most of the youths have read well. The girls, they've made first class. They have done well in school, but they are finding it difficult getting jobs. What they will do next is best left to the imagination. And that is the reason why we are in this dire situation. I believe going forward, like one of my colleagues said earlier, we must declare an emergency on unemployment. Each time there is a vacancy of 100 people, you get 1 million plus to apply for such jobs. It gets frustrating for them after some time. To even compound it, there is a limit to age when it comes to employment. They tell you they can't take anybody above 25. And most of them had been looking for a job for the last 6 years. And they are now 30. What is supposed to happen to them? They are all sitting there. The government needs to declare an emergency. And the emergency is as good as being declared now, because something has to be done. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ben Uwajumogu.
I congratulate and support the mover of this motion and for the timeliness of it and the severity of the challenge. But I think, Mr. President, that we need to reframe our approach. We need to reframe our approach and
Chief Whip, you are doing a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Very soon you will order Senate President. Buhari, you should tell Senate President to...
Thank you, Mr. President. I was saying, Mr. President, that we need to reshape the narrative and the approach to solving the problem of unemployment in Nigeria. And I agree with Senator Patrick Esenwa on his submission that governments are not known for creating jobs. It is businesses that create jobs. So public sector approach to job creation don't work on a sustainable basis because it only creates fiscal expansion, government spending to pay emergency jobs that are created by government. And for Nigeria, in an era of reduced revenue and growing public resistance to borrowing, this whole approach of increasing the wage responsibility of government is a no-go area. There are three things that causes unemployment, and employment is a direct consequence of these three things. One is the low rate of capital formation. In any economy, when capital formation is difficult, it's difficult to generate new businesses. Also, in an environment where there is a high rate of business collapse, for one reason or the other, we lose jobs. And of course, lastly, is the issue of poor skills and the wrong kind of education system that does not prepare people for employment or self-employment. Therefore, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I think the theater of action for solving the problem of unemployment in Nigeria is actually resident in the states, because this is where businesses situate, that's where businesses are created, that's where businesses collapse, that's where consumption is taking place, that's where employment is being demanded. The type of emergency we are asking for should be directed at the states. Mr. President, it will amaze us that the platform for economic coordination between the federal government and the states in 6 years of previous administration never held one meeting in this same country. But it is only in this current government that we have a rebirth of the National Economic Council, which is beginning to debate the problem of economics in the states. Mr. President, I think the prayer of this motion should emphasize the need for us to pay attention to the issue of enabling environment or doing business in states, so that competition among states for investment and employment will begin to take place. To target the federal government as the provider of jobs in a federation, I think is an anomaly. It is an anomaly because we are talking here about revenue. To raise tax, people are saying no. To borrow, people are saying no. Where does the federal government get the money? So it is the states that I think we should encourage, and our Committee on Commerce and Trade should be directed to focus more on the disaggregation of enabling environment challenges from federal to states, if possible, to local governments. I so submit.
State and local governments to declare emergency on the provision of employment in the use of Nigeria. Those in favor of prayer 1 say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Prayer 2, urge the federal government through the Ministry of National Planning to put up a mechanism and program that will provide employment for our teeming unemployed graduates in all tiers of government. Those in favor of prayer 2 say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Prayer 3, urge the federal, state, and local governments to revitalize existing industries, build new ones, and provide a conducive and enabling environment for the private sector to build more industries. Those in favor of this prayer say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. And prayer 4, urge the federal government to initiate a sustainable unemployment fund for the payment of living stipends to unemployed Nigerians and to such persons secure any kind of employment. Those in favor of prayer 4 say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you very much, distinguished colleagues.